Alright, well, I've been getting the question enough times that I think it's time I finally made a video about it. So, we're gonna have a little bit of story time, so I guess pull up a chair and grab some popcorn and a beer and enjoy the ride. A lot of people have been asking me exactly what the heck happened to Oliver. So, we're gonna skip all the stuff in the beginning, not because it's not important, but because it's not important to this particular part of the story. And all we really care about as to what killed Oliver is what happened between 1960 and 1976. So, up until 1960, Oliver had been expanding into different markets. They were expanding their farm equipment product line. They were expanding into heavy equipment and earth moving. They bought BG Manufacturing out of California, which manufactured pan scrapers and stuff like that. They were starting to get into backhoes. They'd already been producing bulldozers because of cleat track. So they'd been doing all that. They were gaining market share hand over fist. They were showing profit every year. They were investing in research and development, investing in plan updates, yada yada yada. Basically, up until 1960, it seemed like they were making every decision they could have made. They were making the right one. Then we enter 1960. In 1960, White Motor Corporation gained majority share of bought the majority share of the Oliver Company stock, and with that gained majority control over the Oliver Farm Equipment Company, which up until 1960 had always had been chaired by a member of the original Oliver family. That all ended in 1960. For a while, a member of the Oliver family still remained as a figurehead on the board, but they had pretty much lost most of their executive power. So, 1960, White Motor Corporation gains majority control over Oliver Farm Equipment Company. 1962, White Motor Corporation buys Minneapolis Moline. 1963, White Motor Corporation buys Cockshut. Minneapolis Moline survived the buyout. As soon as White bought Cockshut, they immediately discontinued the Cockshut line. And everything in the Cockshut line was replaced with an Oliver painted red. Now, the reason for all these buyouts right in a row was because White Motor Corporation was actually a truck manufacturing company. The early trucks were sold under the Autocar brand, and then they became White Autocar, and then they became White Road Boss, and then they became White GMC, and then White name disappeared altogether. But White, when they gained majority control of Oliver, had no interest in manufacturing farm equipment. The reason they were looking to buy out another company was because their truck division was failing miserably. They were losing money, they were losing market share. Things weren't looking good for them, and they needed another source of income to help finance the truck company, which was going to fail regardless. So basically, when they got Oliver and Moline and Cockshut, the first thing they started doing was siphoning profits off the top to finance the truck division, which Oliver was in a position that it didn't really start to hurt it at first. The company was strong enough, it had a good enough product line, and it was far enough ahead in its research and development that it didn't really seem like anything bad was going on at first. Now, the reason that they bought Cockshut was because Oliver's combine plant in Battle Creek, Michigan was way out of date. Basically, it was the old Nichols and Shepard threshing machine plant. And it was going to take a lot of money to bring the plant back up to spec and retool for the new generation of combine. Cockshut had just built a brand spanking new combine plant in Brantford, Ontario. So when White bought Cockshut, that was the only reason they bought Cockshut, was to get that plant, which is why as soon as White bought out Cockshut, they discontinued the actual Cockshut line and replaced it with Oliver. Or with Oliver Farm Equipment, just painted red. Moline didn't suffer the same fate at first. For a while, Oliver and Moline went their separate ways, but White had their hands in both of them, pulling money out of them. So, 1963, White buys Cockshut. Then, in 1965, White did its first, or showed where it was first starting to meddle in the company. In 1965, they shut their crawler production, ended altogether. They completely discontinued the crawler line, which was a big mistake because at that time Oliver had a very, very, very large share of the crawler market because Cleat Track had a very, very large share of the crawler market, and that carried into when Oliver and Cleat Track merged. And back in the day, Cleat Track was actually a larger crawler manufacturer than Caterpillar, so they had a very, very, very loyal following, and that, like I say, that continued into Oliver. So, 1965, they shut down crawler production altogether, end it. Then, once again, they kind of stayed out of it for a little while. Then, in 1970, White got into major financial trouble and they had to restructure. When they restructured, the Oliver Farm Equipment Company ceased to exist. It became White Farm Equipment. Now, when this happened, Oliver also ceased to become a full-line company because during the restructure, White shut down the Shelbyville, Illinois plant, which was where all the balers, the hay equipment, cotton equipment, all the odds and ends that Oliver had were built in Shelbyville, and White shut it down. Another big mistake, because Oliver had a very, very large following for their hay equipment, because you could not beat a Rotoflow feed baler. So that's why you find a crap ton of Oliver 620, 720, and 520 balers, is because they sold a crap ton of them. Now, the other thing that happened in 1970, which automatically spelled the end for Oliver, was White moved all of the farm equipment production management to the Moline plant in Hopkins, Minnesota. And from the time White bought Oliver and Moline and started working with them together, Oliver and Moline were like this with each other. They did not get along. And when they moved all the management up to Hopkins in 1970, the managers at Moline thought they saw the writing on the wall, and what they thought was going to happen was the Oliver line was going to get discontinued, and all the Olivers were going to become Molines painted green. So because of this, Moline started pulling money away from Oliver. This is where the 310 Waukesha comes into play. The 310 Waukesha was never supposed to be put in the 55 series. Um, the 1950 T was never actually supposed to be built either. What the 1950 T was White's first, what's the word I'm looking for here? White's first step towards trying to get their hands in the tractor manufacturing. And basically what that tractor was supposed to be a test bed for the turbocharged 310. Because in the late 1960s, Oliver, since they were still basically managing themselves just under White Motor Corporation, but it was still Oliver Farm Equipment, Oliver had a new design program called the Corporate Tractor Program. The corporate tractors were what was supposed to become the 55 series. And basically, it wasn't a damn thing like what the tractors turned out to be. The 1755, or the 1855 and 1955 all had, well, to start off, the entire line of tractors had brand new, ground up, redesigned Waukesha engines. Completely different from anything that they had used in the double aughts in the 50 series. The 1855 and 1955 were both going to be up over 400 cubic inches, which is where tractors in that horsepower range should have been. Just look at a John Deere 4020, that was 404 cubic inches, and it was only 92 horse. That tractor is 108 horse from the factory, and it's only 310 cubic inches. So, and the other thing that the corporate tractors were going to have as standard equipment was a true CVT, or constantly variable transmission. Not a hydro, not a power shift, an actual planetary drive CVT transmission, which basically means the further forward you push the lever, the faster you go, regardless of engine RPM. But it's not a hydro, it's actual gear drive. But it uses and I can't remember, there's very, very little information left regarding how that transmission was built, because White destroyed all the records. But there was either one or two planetary gear sets in the rear end, and it was basically a seamless shift from one gear set to the other gear set to get your full speed range. And basically, if it was anything like a modern CVT transmission, which again nobody really knows because the design was, White just threw all the records away. If it's anything like a modern CVT transmission, there is a hydraulic motor in the transmission, but all that hydraulic motor does is it is used to apply a braking force to the planetary gear set to make the planet gear and the ring gears and everything change speeds to get your variable speed range. The only thing left of the corporate tractor program is a few pictures, which were in the Oliver magazine a few years ago, and a 21-second video clip of a front wheel assist Oliver corporate tractor with that CVT transmission pulling, it's like a 3 or a 4 shank deep ripper, and basically it's running through the field, and you could see him move the lever up and pull the lever down without changing engine RPM, and speed up and slow down. And it was typical experimental tractors. The sheet metal on them looked like they took the tractor out to the sheet metal shop and told the guys out there, hey, cover this up. And it's all like hand broke and square bent. The experimental tractors were ugly as sin. But that was also by design, because they didn't want anybody to know what they were while they were out on the test farms. However, that didn't stop anybody from figuring out what they were, because before White Motor Corporation started screwing around, I've heard numbers ranging anywhere from 1,200 to 2,500 standing orders for 55 series tractors, of which the assembly line hadn't even been installed yet at the Charles City plant to start building. Because farmers saw what they were and they immediately wanted them. Now, Oliver had the plant shutdown scheduled, the assembly line for the new tractors was built, ready to install. Matter of fact, the assembly line for them was built. Actually, all the for the double lots, the 50 and the 55 series, all the assembly lines for them were built right up here in St. Joe, Michigan. And a matter of fact, I talked to one of the guys at a tractor show that was, I don't remember if he was a rigger or a project manager for the original 55 series assembly line that was supposed to be installed. But regardless, the plant shutdown was scheduled, the assembly line was built, everything was ready, they were staging equipment. All they had to do was install the assembly line and start building tractors. Then the White restructure happened, they needed money, they decided to scrap the program. Threw it all away. All the experimental tractors were scrapped, the new assembly line was scrapped, everything. And all they did was they took the 50 series tractors and turned the screw harder. Now, that's where that 1950T comes in. White saw what was going to happen and they wanted a way out, so they started working with that tractor as White's experimental tractor for that 310 Waukesha to see if they could make it do what they wanted to, and they thought they got away with it. Which, the 310 Waukesha, very good motor, as long as it's naturally aspirated, in that 75 or in the 80 to 100 horse range. They will run all day long, never give you an ounce of trouble. You turbocharge them, as long as you throw an oil cooler on them like what the 1950T had, they'll hold up just fine as long as you stay up on the maintenance and take care of them like you should. The 1755, you hardly ever hear any trouble with the 310s they put in those. But they were only 85 horse and they were naturally aspirated. Perfect spot for a 310 cubic inch diesel. They'll run there all day long. You hardly ever hear any trouble with the 1955s because they were turbocharged, but they put an oil cooler on them. The 1855 was the tractor that killed Oliver, and the 1855 was White's fault because the 1855 and 1950, like I say, none of the 55 series tractors that were built were the 55 series tractors that were supposed to be built. The 1855 ended up costing Oliver millions and millions and millions of dollars because they turbocharged it, turned the screw harder, but they didn't put an oil cooler on it. Almost immediately when they went to the field, the 1855 started throwing rods because what would happen is they were pushing the motor too hard. They would run hot, overheat the oil would break down and lose its lubrication properties, and they would generally throw the number 1 or the number 6 rod because those two are the furthest away from the oil pump. So, Oliver had to recall almost every 1855. Well, they recalled every 1855, but not all of them actually came in. And any 1855 that got brought in, or any 1855 that had a blown motor, Oliver had to put a new 310 in. And the 1855s that got repowered with new 310s had 1955 oil cooler blocks in them. As soon as that happened, the problem went away. The problem is the damage was done, and it had already cost Oliver more money than it cost Oliver more money than it could afford, and B, it gave him a bad reputation. So, in a way, the 1855 is what killed Oliver. Now, we got to come back to White. In 1972, Mind you, from 1970 to 1972, all the management was up at Minnesota, at the Moline plant. Moline had been pulling money away from Oliver, as well as White had been pulling money away from Oliver. So they were getting screwed two ways on that deal. Now, in 1972, White shut down the Moline production plant completely and moved all the management back to Oliver. So that was a little bit of a saving grace, and the Oliver senior management started scrambling to try to salvage what they could, but the problem was the damage was already done. In 1973, White produced its first tractor with the White name on it in the gray color scheme, and that was the 4150. By 1974, the 285 and the 2105 were rolling off the line, alongside the Olivers. Also, in that 1974 or 1973-1974 period, the White decals started showing up on the corner of the Oliver hoods and in the nose cones of the Molines. Then, in 1976, the very last 2255 produced and the very last Oliver produced rolled off the line, and then that was the end of it. So basically, White Motor Corporation is what killed Oliver, which is why a lot of guys have a real bad love-hate relationship with White. A lot of Oliver guys have a real bad love-hate relationship with White because they know what White did to that company. And that love-hate relationship really started in 1970 because when White restructured, they started doing what most tractor manufacturing companies are doing now. They consolidated the dealership network. So all the small dealers lost their distributorship, and the bigger dealers got larger territories, which pissed off a bunch of people because back then, unlike now, farmers were very, 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 very loyal to their dealer. They wanted to work with that guy that their family has been working with for years. When White shut down all them dealerships, they started losing market share hand over fist. So that's when the hatred of White really began for the Oliver guys, and then in 1976 it basically put the nail in the coffin. And there were a lot of Oliver guys that refused to buy a White. They just wouldn't do it. I know there was a lot of guys around here that farmed with Olivers, and they all went to IH or Deere because A, they didn't like or they couldn't stand what had been happening to the company, and B, when White tractors came out, the dealership service went to shit. So the question of what killed Oliver, the answer is White Motor Corporation. Because they had no business getting their hands into a farm equipment manufacturing company. A, because they had no clue how it worked, and B, because they had no interest in manufacturing farm equipment. All they wanted was money to keep the truck division going, which ended up failing anyway. And a lot of guys will say, well, it doesn't matter, Oliver probably never would have made it through the farm depression in the 80s anyway. And my answer to that is, as shitty as White was, they made it through the 80s. If Oliver could have started producing the 55 series that was supposed to be built, it probably would have been a different big three farm equipment manufacturing companies, because they would have made Deere and IH look like they were in the Stone Age when they came out with that CVT transmission. And that's really the pisser of the whole deal, is unlike IH, which died because of piss poor management and the farm crisis in the 80s. Ford got killed by the farm crisis in the 80s. Alice got killed by the farm crisis and piss poor management. You know, you could name all these farm equipment companies that died in the 80s because of they weren't setting themselves up for a crisis like that. Oliver could have made it because their R&D was so far ahead. They basically could have got into the 80s and said, well, we'll just stick with where we're at for now, because that's all White did, which is where the love-hate relationship comes in. Is a lot of Oliver guys will hate White, but they'll still run them because deep down they're just Olivers. They were designed by Oliver engineers. They were built in the Charles City plant. They're still Olivers. They're just not. They just don't say Oliver on the side. So, if White would have kept their hands out of the business they had no business being in, I'll bet it would have been I.H. Oliver and Deere today. If that. Because, like I say, they were so far ahead of their time with that 55 series that was supposed to come out. And all the markets that they were getting into before White started meddling in it, they set themselves up for success. And White, in a matter of 16 years, took a company that was gaining market share and showing a profit every year, or showing an increasing profit every year, and in a matter of 16 years, bankrupt them. So, yeah. Now, would I still run a White? Yeah, I would, because, like I say, deep down under that gray sheet metal, they're still an Oliver. But it's just a shame what White Motor Corporation did to a company that was so far advanced of everybody else. I mean, Oliver had so many firsts to their name. They were the first company to offer a high compression gasoline engine in a farm tractor, the Hart-Par 70. The reason that tractor's designated a Model 70 isn't just some random number they pulled out of their ass. It was because it was designed to run on 70 octane gasoline, which back in 1935 was hot rod shit. That in 1935, the only thing that ran fuel that hot was cars and trucks. Tractors still ran on kerosene. Oliver was the first company to offer a 6-cylinder engine in a row crop farm tractor, period. Oliver was the first company to come up with an electric over hydraulic system, which was the hydroelectric system. And it worked. The only guys that had trouble with them were the guys that let their stuff sit outside, because at the times the seal technology wasn't there. The system itself was near perfect, because the switches worked, the cylinders worked, everything worked like it should have. Oliver was the first company to offer a farm tractor with factory installed front wheel assist in 1960. Oliver, and I'm sorry Red Iron, Oliver invented the live power takeoff, although history will say Cockshut did. Cockshut actually did not. Oliver started experimenting with live power takeoff before World War II. The war shut down its R&D on it, and then it resumed in 1945 when the war ended. And basically what happened there was right before Oliver was ready to release the fleet lines, which were the first tractors to have live power takeoff, Cockshut hired away a couple of Oliver engineers that worked on the project, and so basically Oliver had done all the work, and Cockshut just had to copy the design and stick it on their tractor. So Cockshut beat Oliver to the market by like 4 or 5 months. So Oliver invented the live power takeoff. Oliver was the first company to make a crawler on rubber tracks, not Caterpillar. Anyone that wants to see a picture of it, look up or Google CleatTrack HGR. It was a CleatTrack HG on rubber tracks. They sold a shit ton of those things. The problem was it was another design that was a shade bit ahead of its time, and if you pulled them hard, the tracks would stretch and fall off. So the reason that there's one surviving example left today in a museum up in Minnesota or Montana, I can't remember where, but all the rest of them were recalled back to the dealer and had regular steel tracks put on them. But Oliver was the first one to have a rubber tired crawler, a rubber track crawler, and the list goes on. They would have been the first to the market with a CVT transmission by like 30 years. It's really sad what White did to them. Yeah. If it would have never happened, it would have been really cool to see the stuff that would have been churned out of that factory. So, that's kind of the long short of it. There was some rambling and a couple detours that came back around to the middle and whatnot, but I hope that got the gist of what happened and how Oliver, which was way ahead of its time in a lot of ways, managed to die in a very, very, very short span. And technically it wasn't even 16 years, because up until basically 1969, the 50 series, Oliver was still rocking it. It wasn't until 1969 when the 55 series came out that bad stuff started happening. And like I say, it all came down to the 1855. That's really, really, really what started hurting him. But the 1855, the whole 55 series was White's baby. They were the ones that caused the 55 series to happen, and the 55 series is what killed Oliver. So, yeah. So I hope that kind of gives you more of an idea of what happened with that company. And I actually, for one of my classes in college, I had to write a report on the rise and fall of a company, and I chose Oliver. I'm going to see if I can't tack it on to the end of this video. You'll have to read it, so I mean, it's up to you if you do that or not. I know nobody wants to read on YouTube because you're not here to read, but it's kind of Oliver did some really... From James Oliver on, that company did some really cool shit. Oh, another Oliver first, just because it just popped into my head. Oliver was the first company was the first company to offer a true starting diesel engine in a row crop farm tractor. Everybody else had engines that started on gas and ran on diesel. Oliver was the first one to put an engine in a farm, and I should say the first American company to put a diesel engine in a farm tractor that started on diesel and ran on diesel. And that was in 51 or 52. Or no, it was earlier than that. Might have been 50. Trying to remember, because the Fleet Lines were the first ones with diesels. Well, technically the 80 was the first one with a diesel. Because they put a 4-cylinder Buda, or they offered a 4-cylinder Buda in the 80. And that was a true starting diesel engine too, so I guess the 80 would count. But, anyway, this video has already gotten long enough, so, for just me sitting here talking and staring at tractors, so, I guess, I hope that answers some of your questions. And I guess that does it for this one, and we'll catch you guys on the next one.